I've really not heard from too many people who I can honestly say are supporting Hamas. I think more common is people who are willing to look the other way about how Hamas stands for the opposite of all of the progressive values I stand for. So I would soften it a little bit. I don't deny there are pro-Hamas people out there. It's not the majority of the people I'm interacting with. So that's really all I can tell you as far as that goes. In terms of the answer as to what this is all rooted in, I start from a place of charity and benefit of the doubt. I sympathize with the idea that if you identify oppression that's going on, there's an understandable instinct to try to right that oppression and to try to defend the oppressed. Makes perfect sense, right? We're starting from a place that makes a lot of sense to me. In the folks I talk to, people that have called into my show and who say, I don't like what Biden's been doing on this issue or whatever the case may be, and I explore it with them, sometimes there's a lack of factual knowledge. They don't know a bunch of the facts about the history of the region. There's this new poll that finds 20% of 18 to 29-year-olds think the Holocaust was a myth, that it didn't actually happen. It's hard when you lack the factual basis to come to the right conclusions, because if the inputs are junk, the output is probably going to be junk. I think that in some left-wing circles, not the ones I operate in, but they exist, there's these litmus tests. And one litmus test is if there are two groups in a conflict, if one of the groups is perceived as not being white, and remember, whether Jews are white depends on who you ask. You ask the right-wing anti-Semites, they go, no, the Jews are definitely not white. There's something else. So putting that aside for a second, the litmus test requires that you say the non-white population must be the oppressed one. Or there are those who are generally speaking just contrarians about American foreign policy. If the United States is allied with Israel, Israel must be uniquely and unambiguously in the wrong, period, and no further analysis is needed. I could go on. I don't think it's one thing for everybody that comes to a different conclusion than I do. With some people, it's that they don't have all the information. With others, it's that they're buying into certain litmus tests that I prefer to try to exit and think more critically about. Depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah, I definitely... I was able to be more gracious for that and generous to that perspective pre-October 7th. And I kind of felt like after that, seeing the footage, seeing the celebration of such atrocities, it seemed to be to me that if you don't know where you stand on this after witnessing that, I feel like your moral compass is broken. You're not just misinformed, but you have a warped sort of sense of whether it's ideologically driven or a sense of, I don't know, do you think that, I bring up Jordan Peterson a lot because I do impressions of him. But one of the things he talks about is, when the left goes too far, and identifying that. Do you think that there's something to be said that's fair about left-wing movements in particular? I mean, I guess it goes far right, far left, but the history of this idea of under the name of revolution, under the name of resistance, under the guise of that, we can justify and apologize for all kinds of atrocity. Like this idea isn't new. You look at Che Guevara and those kind of revolutions in the past where it turns out later on, Stalin, it turns out later on, there was all this atrocity and now we see it full on, but in the name of some sort of idea, abstract idea of revolution or resistance against the oppressor, it becomes virtuous. And it's not just the barbarians that commit these acts. It's the people and all of these atrocities of the 20th century, they started in the intelligentsia sort of creating these ideas that we are purifying society. These people believe they're doing something good. And that's what's really troubling to me. Do you have any thoughts on that as far as? Well,
I don't know that I'll answer while clarifying that I don't necessarily agree with the entire framework you've kind of teed up there. But here's what I will say. I do.
Busted. Yeah.
I am neither a socialist nor an accelerationist. Socialism, I think people more or less understand what that means. Accelerationism being the idea that you sort of need to burn things down and worsen them in order to precipitate building them back up in the way that you want to see them. I've been doing a lot of research on accelerationism for a book that I'm writing. And the way I see the biggest advancements in history, certainly in the United States, and also successful progressive movements around the world, including Northern Europe and others, the biggest successes have come from well-regulated capitalist economies that make incremental change in the right direction. So that's my view. That view is not nearly radical enough for some of the people that are out there right now.
All I heard you say was capitalist. Yes. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Well, I mean, listen, Denmark is a capitalist country, right? Sweden, these are capitalist countries that say, we'll use the taxes we collect to make sure no one's standard of living goes too low, which sounds eminently reasonable to me. But I think my point is, I try not to go around defending movements that aren't mine unless there's a very specific reason to do so. So my view on accelerationism and the sort of thing you're talking about is, I don't believe history points to that being the way to improve society.
Yes, you mean an accelerationism, just to define it one more time, the extreme sort of burning down of all the institutions and trying to build it back up is almost utopian and almost and inevitably bloody and violent.
You don't even have to, the way I define accelerationism is, let's accelerate the worsening of society in order to then get some kind of clean slate or place where we can rebuild it in our image. Sometimes those on the revolutionary left say we should make capitalism as bad as possible, rather than, like, me as a social democrat, I want to improve capitalism so it works better. Accelerationist revolutionaries would say, let's allow capitalism to get as bad as possible, because then it will collapse and we can rebuild society the way they want to do it. I don't believe there's a historical reason to think that works.
That sounds dark, very dark.